Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. It is Monday, February 25th, 2019. Still in February. Feels like a very long February. Everything feels very long. These days feel like weeks, weeks like months, months like months with extra days at the end of the month. It gets weird at that point. It's not a linear progression. And, well, all right. We're going to begin. This is actually the last week of February, Friday. By Friday, we'll be saying Happy March. The Oscars were on last night. I don't get much into the Oscars. I don't get to see most of the movies, and I no longer know anybody who's, on the show. Although, well, occasionally there are some very famous folks, but I just don't have the patience to sit down and watch it. I have not seen the movies. I couldn't tell you who should have won, who shouldn't have won. Lots of controversy swirling around last night's, I guess, Best Picture award, because I imagine that's what controversy swirls about. I understand it went to, this is the other thing that's confusing me this morning, is they're both green, but one is Green Book, one's Green New Deal. I don't know. It's got me confused this morning. I actually did see Green Book, and, I don't know. I mean, okay, it was a good enough movie all by itself, like in isolation. Entertaining story. Is it true? No. Is it, not true at all, not close to true? I don't know. There's some truth to it. I suppose there was a guy, he drove this other guy around. The families dispute the truthfulness of the story. There's controversy about the way the story is told and who it centers. There is controversy about the person who directed the movie. There's controversy about everything. I already saw one opinion column being published last night that Green Day, first of all, I think this is probably the first time in a number of years, not the first time ever, but the first time in a long time, and the first of very few times where I've actually seen the Best Picture winner. I know it's almost certainly the first time my kids have seen the Best Picture winner as well. And I was able to explain to the older one what the controversy, or tell him about what the controversy was going on around its popularity. This was before it won. I didn't bother telling him that it won the Best Picture. It's not going to come up in his day. I'll have to bring it up gently with the younger of the two, but, yeah, I feel bad. Like I kind of wanted to say to him, hey, you saw the Best Picture of the year, but, I have to break the news to you kids. It's the worst Best Picture in 10 years. That was the opinion column that got published last night. I guess of the last 10 winners, it's the worst movie to have won Best Picture. I don't understand the Academy politics of this stuff, and I don't pretend to follow it. Try to get a handle on it just because it's something people are talking about, but whatever. And so I don't know what to say about. Do I congratulate people? Do I not congratulate people? I don't know. Otherwise, it seemed like a fine show in the sense that I watched like 6-7 minutes of it, possibly, not including commercials. And it seemed to have gone well in terms of not having a permanent standing host. I don't think they need that anymore. I don't know if they'll ever get anybody anymore, given the controversies that seem to attach themselves. But seems to have gone well. I think, and I thanks to Twitter folks who tweeted around clips of the good stuff that happened. I got to see Melissa McCarthy doing the best costuming, or presenting the. Did they present the award? I didn't even get to that. They just showed her coming out, and I don't know the guy who was with her presenting the awards, but it was funny, and that's good news. The rest of it, not so funny. I saw Dana Carvey and Mike Myers doing their bit to connect themselves to Bohemian Rhapsody, so that was fun. And that's the extent of my Oscar commentary. I'm sure you have more. Maybe Greg has more. Most of my weekend was taken up with ignoring or steering clear consciously of the controversy swirling around Dianne Feinstein's viral video moment. We can discuss that a little bit. And I tweeted on it a little bit. It's disappointing that we're putting this much time and effort into it. I don't know. It seems to me that so much can be seen from so many angles in this video and in this exchange, and not that many people seem particularly interested to hear them all. So I don't know whether we'll discuss them or not. We'll see whether we get to stay on the air today. Violent weather moving in, I think, on a lot of areas in the East Coast. A lot of heavy winds, big gusts. We've had a few light flickers in the morning, so fingers crossed that it doesn't interrupt our broadcast. And I guess if that does happen, if for some reason we just cut out on you entirely, I think we'll still be able to record our podcast uninterrupted, although it occurs to me now that I guess the next thing that we do besides possibly buying a backup microphone is we got to go out and pick up some. We don't have. I shouldn't talk about it. We don't have a battery backup for the main computer here. And I guess if there's a power outage, that's really something we should be thinking about, because then even if we go off the air, I always say, well, we can rely on our ability to record the podcast and always put that up. But that was back from the days when we were doing it on the laptop. And if the power went out, the battery would keep us going. And I really haven't given that any thought. And that is it. That just jinxed it. I guess we're doomed from here on in. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. I have not seen any messages this morning from Greg, so I don't know whether that's just he's sitting back basking in the win of the Oscars last night. As you know, he won Best Director, I'm guessing, but I haven't seen his stories lined up this morning either. So that also could mean that Connecticut has been blown off the map by high winds as well. That tends to happen up in his neck of the woods. So we'll see what we can do, and whether he's up to joining us, or whether there's a message in my email somewhere that very politely explains, no, I won't be there tomorrow, and I just totally missed it. All right. Well, let's see. Plenty of stories in pocket, some of which are even relevant to real news besides what happened in the movies and what happened in viral videos over the weekend. Let's see. We have new warnings about the week to give everybody. First of all, this is the week during which Donald Trump will be traveling to Hanoi, where he will Hanoi Kim Jong-un and the rest of us too, to no end, to no doubt. I don't really care whether he annoys Kim Jong-un. I think that would be fine. He probably deserves it, but they're going to meet in Hanoi, and it's not really clear what they're going to do. They think they're going to, as between the two of them, they think they're going to hammer out some sort of deal about the status of the nuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. But that is not by any means clear. It's not clear at all that they're on the same page. It's not clear that they're pursuing the same end. It's not clear that Kim Jong-un is willing to agree or abide by any agreements. We really don't have any serious expectations of Trump and his deal-making abilities when he goes there, but he's going, so they're going to put on a show. At the same time, I understand Mike Pence is bound for some overseas destination or another as well, and I don't even know what it is, and it's been some time. I don't know whether we have scheduled having both the president and vice president out of the country at the same time in a while. I guess that leaves Nancy Pelosi, doesn't actually transfer any power to her even temporarily, but I don't know. I guess if we lock the doors and we don't let either of them back in, that would leave Nancy Pelosi in charge. But that's not the only thing going on this week. There's word that there may be voting finally on a resolution of disapproval for Trump's emergency declaration. There's schedules for who's up. Michael Cohen is scheduled to come in, I think, and testify to some fantastic list of crimes in many cases. And, wow, I don't even remember what else is on our list for this week, but I think I wrote about it earlier. Well, Greg Dworkin is here. Maybe he remembers. There's probably at least 5 things, and I've gotten to 2 or possibly 3, depending on how many you want to count for the president and vice president being out of the country. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
Good morning. So, yeah, we did have some power issues. It's howling wind outside. And we lost power for about an hour, which set me back a little bit, but didn't stop the pundit roundup from going up. I just sent you over
solar
Skype.
Powered. Yeah, okay.
Exactly. The Saturdays and todays. And, of course, in honor of the Oscars, the title for today was McCabe and Mr. Mueller, also known as War and a Piece of the Action.
Okay.
The big thing, of course, Andrew McCabe's book is still being reviewed, and he's still making the rounds of the morning shows. Jeff Toobin reviewed Andrew McCabe's book and basically said the warnings are familiar. The question that remains is whether and how the people in the representatives will respond to this threat from the office that once seemed to be liberty's foremost guardian. In other words, it used to be that the president, and he talks about some of the old movies back in the 60s, famous ones, Dr. Strangelove, 7 Days in May, Failsafe.
Okay.
Where you had a likable all-American president protecting us from the military and the bureaucracy.
I see.
And that story's been flipped.
Yes.
It's now the military and the bureaucracy trying to protect us from a incompetent and perhaps traitorous president.
Yeah, and I don't know how the military is doing with it, but...
Well, they tried, Nick Astor and Kelly and Mattis were there trying to, hold the line.
Yeah, well, they left, so we'll see how that goes.
We don't know how the story ends. I mean, that's the whole point with the Mueller report. But what he's trying to say is that we have this whole setup here where, Trump is evil and people are trying to do something about it, and McCabe is trying to tell us.
Okay. So maybe best screenplay or something like that is what McCabe is laying out for us. I had forgotten, so tops of the list of things that are supposed to happen today because they're not really, or this week, because nobody has really said they are supposed to happen. But everybody spent last week talking about how this week would be it. The Mueller report is due. Mueller has said nothing about this, but everyone spent last week saying it. And so now we're in next week. I don't know whether everybody's going to try and pretend they didn't say that or whether it's really coming. I don't know. Well,
that's the thing. Nobody knows. Nobody knows whether it's been delayed a week or whether it's not coming at all. Lots of speculation on the Sunday shows. For example, Neil Katyal was on Meet the Press, and then they had somebody else whose name I forget who used to work with Ken Starr. So they didn't exactly have the same view on this. But one of the views that they did share is basically whether it's sealed or not, we don't know. But it's not likely that Mueller would issue a report and then issue indictments. The indictments would precede issuing the report. So as long as he hasn't issued the report, you can't assume he's done with indictments.
I guess that's true. Unless they all just took a week off.
The other thing is you don't know whether he just farmed those indictments out to SDNY.
Yeah, that's possible too. I don't know what he's up to. He won't tell me.
He won't tell anybody. But everybody who knows him says he does exactly everything by the book. So what it's likely is that he's laid everything out and gives a report of the evidence to the Attorney General, and then we'll see what happens.
That guy.
We don't know if that leads to him doing the indictments, other people doing the indictments. It's laid out. It's given to the Attorney General, Barr. We don't know if we see it. We don't know if we don't see it. Congress gets upset. There's going to be a lot going on. It's not going to be good for Trump politically. That's what we do know. But the rest, we don't know. So we'll have to see.
All right. President and the vice president walk into a bar indictment.
Okay. Other things, big stories that happened, of course, the Robert Kraft bust.
Yes, right.
Happened since I spoke to you last.
Yes, really, almost literally, since it happened just about after you spoke to me last. Yeah. And I guess he wishes you would have kept talking. You would have taken the eyes off of him. But, yeah, that's a big deal.
And
He's
then
not the
Jeffrey
only one
Epstein stories about how his Acosta, that Labor Secretary Acosta's arranged deal was deemed to be not in compliance with the law.
Right.
And in light of the Robert Kraft and Jeffrey Epstein stories about underage girls and trafficking with them.
In Palm Beach, Florida.
Well, and with Michael Cohen speaking to the Southern District of New York about other related Trump businesses, and that's all we know, it is a reminder of something you covered very well back in the day, of Trump, in fact, owning a sketchy modeling agency.
Yeah. Well, all modeling agencies are a little sketchy, and his was sketchier than most.
This was from Mother Jones, the Mogul's New York modeling agency, Trump Model Management, has profited from using foreign models who came to the U.S. on tourist visas that did not permit them to work here. According to 3 former Trump models, all non-citizens, who shared their stories with Mother Jones, financial and immigration records included in a recent lawsuit filed by a 4th former Trump model, so she too worked for Trump's agency in the U.S. without a proper visa.
Yeah, that happens a lot in the Trump organization.
Which is a reminder he's actually an expert in these immigration issues. We always say, what do you know about it? He actually knows quite a bit about it because he cheats about it all the time.
Yes, he alone can fix it.
He has people on properties who do that. But there's another story that was also buried from a couple of years ago that I thought was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And another question, will this be a topic of interest for Southern District in New York? And this is a story from The Independent. Let me just add this to the list. So I didn't have time to create the list because of my wind power problem. I'm creating it as we go along. Trump just approved, it said, this is 2 years old, China just approved Donald Trump branded spas.
Ooh, they love spas.
Escort services.
Those two things have nothing to do with one another.
Hotels and massage parlors without U.S. Congress permission.
That is weird.
Preliminary approval has been granted for 38 trademarks, which raises further questions about conflicts of interest. And, of course, there's a tweet for everything, so there was an old Trump tweet before he was president talking about the wonderfulness of the Jupiter Spa that's at a Trump property.
Yes, he owns lots of property down there, and Jupiter is, of course, the location where Robert Kraft's infractions took place. I don't know whether his arrest was there or what, but it's 10 minutes across town between his golf course in Jupiter. That's where he plays when he's down there. Or I think he's got more than one in the neighborhood. When he goes to Mar-a-Lago, he's very frequently playing at the Jupiter golf course. Jupiter's where the massage parlor was. There's half a dozen of them around there. It's kind of a weird thing. Palm Beach seems to be a hot jurisdiction for, international sex trafficking involving Donald Trump and his friends.
Yeah, well, another person that was busted is an CEO or ex-high official from Citibank.
Oh.
And at least a couple of people on the air have said there's like 175 people who are going to be busted over this. Apparently what happened is the local cops went in and planted cameras and filmed everybody. And they said there's more names that are going to be revealed, some of which you will recognize. That's all they said. So there may be more in that story.
Bruce Wayne.
They just said a lot of people in that area are very nervous right now.
Yeah, and so they should be. It's also many people have pointed out it's quite odd that in addition to participating in this trafficking, which is horrific in its own right and on every level, that very wealthy people were really compromising themselves for very low dollar situations too, and it's just out there. I mean, all I'll say is that there's going to be more to that story, so just be prepared to hear more about it. Okay, I'm prepared. I want to hear those names, and if they're Democrats, screw them. There you go. We'll just put that out there.
Yeah.
I don't care.
What else? There's a whole lot of chatter about the various and sundry Democratic names that are being thrown into the primary hat. And there's a whole bunch.
Okay.
Whether it's too many or not too many, that's part of the story.
That hawk breeding hat I saw over the weekend.
Yeah. For example...
Threw you off.
Yeah, it did. I wasn't expecting that. Jonathan Bernstein has a story. Again, I have that in the Pundit Roundup today about whether the field is too big or not too big. Nate Silver argues that a very large candidate field is dangerous because when you have very large candidate fields, you wind up with people like, Jimmy Carter or Donald Trump. The party doesn't decide. he's more of the party should decide, then you get a better candidate.
I see.
But Jonathan Bernstein says, no, I'm with Elaine Kamarck, who doesn't think a large field is that big of a problem. The complex rules for awarding delegates to presidential candidates have not changed in many years and will remain the same in 2020. First, there's a threshold of 15% of the primary vote for winning a delegate. In a 20-person field, many candidates won't win a single delegate. And second, while delegates are awarded proportionally, by the time Super Tuesday is over, candidates without delegates are likely to be walking ghosts.
Yeah.
Or dead people walking, or however you like to say it. In other words, winnowing works, so just give it a chance to do that.
Yes, and many, maybe half a dozen of them will be out before there's any voting done anyway.
Let me give you an example of a very prominent name that might be out sooner than you think.
All right.
These are stories both from the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times covering the same thing. And this may have to do with Bernie and Elizabeth Warren fighting over the same territory.
Okay.
But it says Elizabeth Warren's 2020 presidential campaign has struggled with lackluster fundraising since its launch December 31st. So she's trying to boost online giving by publicly disavowing private big dollar only events.
Okay.
And then Shane Goldmacher writing about this, New York Times correspondent says, this feels like one of the more revealing developments of the early 2020 campaign. It's a sign of duress for Warren, who I'm told has not hit small dollar targets. But it will also be a powerful cudgel and differentiator on a crowded debate stage. So she's trying to turn a weakness into a strength. Okay. But as far as early fundraising goes, it is a weakness.
All right. That's another of the fallout, the conditions of a large field like this is there's only so many dollars that come in early and they get split up.
Right. Bernie's not going to have any trouble getting money.
Okay.
I don't think Kamala Harris is going to have any trouble getting money. Joe Biden wouldn't. But some of the other candidates are going to find that they're fighting for what's left, and there's not going to be that much left.
Okay.
Various and sundry ways you can take that metaphorically.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, on the Republican side, interesting article today in Politico. GOP donors, Trump campaign lacks a strategy to win in 2020. Their chief worries, how Trump can win again in Rust Belt states that swung to Democrats in the midterms. And the president's lack of discipline.
Hey.
And I read that story and I said to myself, my goodness, it's so obvious even GOP donors get it. And they're not exactly the brightest bulbs in the ceiling there.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty
Usually
obvious.
They're rich enough so that they can believe whatever they want to believe. We know how that works.
Yeah. Well, they might be being asked for more money than usual because Trump
and they turn
plans to
around
steal
and
it.
say, what for? You guys don't look like you have a strategy to win. Why should we give money to you?
It's not a good
That's
investment.
not normally how they respond. They usually respond as, oh, my gosh, of course, sure, we have to stop the socialists.
Right.
No questions asked. And what I'm saying is, it's so bad, they're asking questions.
Well,
That's not typical of GOP donors.
No, it's not. And there's usually a better plan, and they're even willing to lose money on bad investments. It may be that they're familiar enough with Trump that not only, or might we lose, we're okay with that, but I don't want to lose and not have this guy even try. I don't want him stealing the money and losing. I don't mind him burning it on bad strategy, but trying hard.
Speaking of strategy, apparently I didn't read this one, but I'm just noting for the record, and I'm looking at the tweets, there was an article from Mark Leibovich over the weekend in the New York Times Magazine about Lindsey Graham. The title is How Lindsey Graham Went from Trump Skeptic to Trump Sidekick.
Lackey. Really?
Really.
Okay.
And so there's this one tweet with a quote from the piece that just tells you everything you need to know. And I say this because it's not compromise. You don't have to, have all these conspiracy theories about why Lindsey is selling out and what do they have on him and all this other nonsense. Okay. Lindsey tells Mark Leibovich, if you don't want to get reelected, you're in the wrong business. And Paul Kane retweets that and says, that's about all you need to know.
Yeah. I can see what you mean.
So I will make the following case for you.
All right.
And that is that it's actually unfair, and let's Graham off the hook to claim this compromat pushing him in a direction or another direction. Because that makes it sound like he doesn't have agency, that he doesn't want to do this. I'm saying he's an a-hole. He's doing it on purpose.
Okay.
He's doing it as a choice. Therefore, blame him for everything. He did it. He's choosing to be this way.
What do they have on him? He's Lindsey Graham. That's what they have on him.
He wants to be reelected in the Republican Party in South Carolina.
And he doesn't think that requires any
being
duty
a human
to his
can
country.
Allow you to do that. So you got to be some caricature. It's the only way you get through a Republican primary in South Carolina, is what he's saying.
Yeah. Now he's going to have to explain himself by saying that he's not in favor of the emergency declaration.
I have some North Carolina people I would recommend to him if he really wants to reassure his reelection. They're really clever, and they come up with great schemes to make sure that you win. And nobody ever catches on.
Right. So far, it just means, at worst, it means he has to run twice. That's what happens. They just run
the primary and then the general election.
Well, that and then if he gets caught cheating with these other,
then you just. Well, I don't know what the rules are in South Carolina, but it doesn't matter. They would just rewrite them to make it so that that's what happens.
Yeah, that's very easy. Okay, so all right. Well, it's good. You're creating jobs. I like it. I mean,
so that brings us right to the break.
Yeah, pretty much. This is the time when we get played off the stage.
Yeah, I do highly advise getting a backup battery for at least an hour though, so you don't lose stuff in the middle of when the power goes out and flickers.
Yes, I think that's wise, and it had never. I don't know. For some reason, it occurred to me because I used to run this thing off of a laptop that had the battery built in, and
I have one for my desktop. I have one for the actual internet connection itself, and of course, the third one for video games.
You have one for the whole house, though.
Well, it's enormous. It's like the size of the house next door.
Okay. Well, I'll get about 15 of these. Hold on. I'll be right back. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So far, so good. Fingers crossed that the power stays on before, and as long as I don't have this battery backup, I'm now counting up how many units do I need, and I guess I will need one up here for the show computer, probably one downstairs where the router is doing its work. I can plug my all right. Well, I got all sorts of things. I'm gonna have to get at least 2 of these things so we can bring this show to you uninterrupted. It's funny that it never occurred to me when I switched from the laptop to the nice new Mac Mini. I thought that was the Mac Mini solves all our problems. I can tell because of how much money I had to spend on it. But no, there's always more.
Nothing makes you appreciate power than losing it.
Yes, that's true, and that's why
that's
what's his name is
both a comment on our electrical
Trump.
Grid and a metaphor for the political picture writ large.
Yes. All right. Well, where were we when we last left off, besides not losing power?
So a couple of other things that I wanted to talk about, too, but there was kind of a weird story that was in the New York Times that caught my eye for a number of reasons. I'm going to give that to you. But there were some better stories than this that go with it. So the weird story was the New York Times Magazine had a piece called The Future of Work, Wealthy, Successful, and Miserable. The upper echelon is hoarding money and privilege to a degree not seen in decades, but that doesn't make them happy. Just so you know.
I'm glad.
Yeah. So, here's a guy who got an MBA, and he had a 15th year reunion, and it came a bit of a shock, he says, when I attended my 15th reunion last summer to learn how many of my former classmates weren't overjoyed by their professional lives. In fact, they were miserable.
Oh.
I heard about one fellow alum who had run a large hedge fund until being sued by investors who happened to be the hedge fund manager's relatives. Another person had, how do you get a leg up in a job like that? Well, have rich relatives. That might do it. Another person had risen to a senior role inside one of the nation's most prestigious companies before being savagely pushed out by corporate politics. Another had learned in the maternity ward that her firm was being stolen by a conniving partner.
Oh.
These are extremes, but most of us were living relatively normal, basically content lives. But even among my more sanguine classmates, there was a lingering sense of professional disappointment. Missed promotions, disaffected children, billable hours in divorce court. They complained about jobs that were unfulfilling, tedious, or just plain bad. The stress of having to invest $5 million a day. If you didn't do it, then the next day you had to do $6 million. And his coworkers were constantly undermining one another in search of the next promotion. Insanely stressful work done among people he didn't particularly like. He earned about $1.2 million a year and hated going to the office. I feel like I'm wasting my life, he told me. When I die, is anyone going to care that I earned an extra percentage point of return? My work feels totally meaningless.
It is.
He recognized the privilege of his pay and status, but his anguish seemed genuine. If you spend 12 hours a day doing work you hate, at some point it doesn't matter what your paycheck says. And there's no magic salary at which a bad job becomes a good job.
Ah, that's probably true.
Right. So it was interesting, and it rang true to me because I've known people who worked on Wall Street just because, being a New Yorker and having friends who gravitated there.
Sure.
In one way or another. And the ones I'm still speaking to, many of them told me, I hate what I'm doing. I just want to do this for a few years, get enough money, to get my kids through college, then I'm out of here. Uh-huh. I hate coming to work. I hate going to work. I hate everything about it. But it's a living.
Well, a lot of people hate what they do.
Yeah, exactly. They just happen to get paid a whole lot more.
Yeah. So.
There's an incredible amount of privilege there. But I thought it was a fascinating story just to remind us all that it doesn't really matter what you do.
It's worth knowing.
You really ought to love what you do, and if you love what you do, it's way better than being miserable for money.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess it feeds on itself, and everybody there is miserable, and so they figure if I'm going to be miserable, either I'm going to make everybody else miserable, or I'm going to get a lot of money for doing it, and that sometimes means, I'm sure there are several times that these people are the ones who are savagely pushing others out or undermining others for the extra $100,000 or whatever, just because they're miserable as it is. So I might as well get an extra $100K.
I just read it, and I said to myself, you know what? I really am for that wealth tax that Elizabeth Warren was talking about. I have to go back and look at that again. And it makes me a lot more sympathetic to it.
That's true. And I think for good reason, not even just because I want that money redistributed, but we're constantly being challenged by, let's say, brilliant economic minds like Joe the plumber, who says, what would be my incentive to work more if that money was taxed away? And I would say,
if you hate your job, you don't have an incentive to work
That's
more.
Right.
So shut up.
Exactly. I mean, everybody says their work sucks anyway, so that there's very little incentive to do it anyhow. And at least if that was removed, then you might say, maybe I'll do a little less undermining of everybody else in the world for my hedge fund. Right. Return will be a little lower.
At the same time that story appears, this other story appears. Mm-hmm. Stephen Greenhouse tweets, I got this from my pundit roundup, there are 4 terrific labor stories in today's New York Times. Matthew Desmond, the great sociologist, writes about how lifting workers' wages from $8 an hour to $15 transforms and improves their lives. Quote, a living wage is an antidepressant. It's a stress reliever, end quote. I liked that story a lot better.
I like that headline. Is that in here today? It's in your roundup? Okay.
I'll add it.
Okay.
This is one of those, I'll add it as I speak.
Oh, yeah, that's
so you don't have to go searching.
Fine.
I'll just put it right at the bottom.
I saw that headline somewhere, and I said, that sounds really good. I don't have time to read that. I wish I did. Mm-hmm. I hate my job, or something.
Yeah, something like that. Here's one for you. This is Ed Kilgore writing about process.
I hate his job. All right.
Well, he's writing a New York magazine. And he had this idea that the Democrats should just go ahead and kill the filibuster.
I told you. Now I hate the job I used to.
Now you hate your job?
Yeah, I hate the job I had a couple years ago. Why did I do it? All right.
Why did you do it? Democrats should trust democracy and resolve to kill the filibuster. It may be time to conclude that for Democrats, tolerating while fighting Trump for another 2 years is vastly preferable to accepting the ever more entrenched minority rule his party has come to rely on for much of its power. If Trumpism means anything, it means a rearguard action to deny our people self-government on grounds that the country has lost its greatness and requires rule by a righteous remnant of real Americans composed of tax-paying, Jesus-worshipping, gun-toting patriarchs.
They don't pay taxes.
But that's his base.
Yeah.
Progressives have long quoted Paul Wellstone in identifying themselves as the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party. That's simply not consistent with the willingness to maintain the Senate filibuster. This needs to be a 2020 campaign issue. What do you think?
I think that he thinks that, and I think so too. I don't know how much of a campaign issue it should be. I don't know how successful they'll be making it into one. If they did, fine, I'll take it.
I got a better one.
Yeah, all right.
Lead poisoning.
As
infrastructure and not killing our people.
Oh, all right. I thought you were like, is there someone
That's a better campaign issue. This is from Rolling Stone. It's just a reminder. Awaiting the lead poisoning tipping point, a public health disaster in my native Cleveland once sparked political action. Remember when the Cuyahoga River caught fire?
Yes.
And that needs to happen again.
Okay.
And this has to do with the fact that two new studies in coordination with Cuyahoga County and, pardon me for the pronunciation, I'm not from there, Early Childhood Initiative. Their conclusions were harrowing, analyzing statistics obtained from the Ohio Department of Health, and this is something Sherrod Brown should make an issue. Case Western Studies found that 10.7% of children born in 2012 were found to have elevated blood lead levels by age 5. That's 1,237 affected kids. And though overall lead contamination rates for children in the region have declined, kids under 6 in that county accounted for 41% of Ohio's cases of elevated exposure. And the river isn't to blame. Not even Trump was at fault, although his administration did eliminate 2 programs that focused on protecting kids from lead paint in 2017. What's happening in Cleveland is a result of a system that's been broken for 40 years. The contamination is in the houses that many of the children are living in and in the ground on which they walk and play.
Yes.
Many Ohioans thought the problem had been fixed. We have old housing stock, high poverty, and disinvestment. We have this tremendous industrial past, home to one of the biggest paint companies, Sherwin-Williams. We made our names in a lot of industrial solvents, and the soil is a threat.
Yeah. Well,
just reminds us Flint isn't in isolation.
No.
And that the infrastructure to help protect our kids is crumbling, and with it, we get exposed to all sorts of stuff. That's the environment as opposed to climate change, different issues. But this is from the CDC lead poisoning page. At least 4 million households have children living in them that are being exposed to high lead levels. There are approximately 500,000 U.S. children ages 1 to 5 with lead levels above 5, the reference level at which CDC recommends public health actions be initiated. There is no safe blood lead level. When I was a kid in medicine, it was 20. Then it was lowered to 10. Now it's 5. Lead exposure can affect nearly every system in the body and, causes a lot of things like ADHD and behavioral issues later on. And the goal is to eliminate blood levels of greater than 10, although 5 would be a better one, but you got to start somewhere. And the fact that all of this stuff still exists and that we're wasting money on a stupid wall that experts say is unnecessary, while things like this are real and in people's community, to me, that should be a public health issue. And though it doesn't make it sound like this is one of those rallying calls that a presidential candidate can rally behind, it's local, it hits your community, and it sort of just reminds me of how people in Virginia win elections because they concentrate on traffic. And everybody else outside the region said, well, that's stupid. That's not going to go anywhere. But if you live there, you go, uh-huh.
Yeah, that's true. So, I mean, it's funny. I guess people have put the lead abatement issue out of their minds, and that's probably because in wealthier areas, and I guess places where people tend to turn out and vote with more regularity too, lead is not an issue. It's an issue where people are, it's enough for them just to make it from day to day. and they pretty much collapse at the end of the day of work and aren't thinking about how to, find a candidate who will rally to their position in the national election. But,
well, this is a messaging issue that is going to get people annoyed, okay? But there are many messaging experts who have pointed out that for politicians, you're better off running on trying to fix the 4 million households that have children living in them that are being exposed to high levels of lead.
Yeah.
That's a better message than look at what is happening in Flint. We have to help the people of Flint.
I guess because it's so widely distributed.
It's not just that. It's that if you're helping Flint, you're taking my money to help them. I'm not them. I don't live there. I don't like that.
Well, I don't have lead.
But if you're generically talking about children everywhere in the country and they need help, I'm okay with that. I like children.
If you're not from the party that locks them up.
Right. So, it's a messaging issue, and sometimes people say, well, why are you talking about Cleveland? You've forgotten about Flint. We have to concentrate on Flint. The problem with that is that it's not as easy to do that. People will say, well, Flint's a local issue. That's a Michigan issue. And besides, if I'm in Michigan, I don't live in Flint. So you really have to make it more universal. That's a general rule in politics. If you want to get stuff done, you have to make it more universal than I'm going to help this specific group of people. You have to make it I'm going to help everybody. Everybody's kids matter. Everybody's kids might get exposed to lead, so on and so forth.
And lead causes problems for everybody, whether you're exposed to them or not. If you're exposed to people who are exposed to lead, it can be an issue.
And you're going to have to pay for people who are exposed to lead because that does damage and winds up affecting the education system, how much you pay for your school systems, this, that, and everything else.
This is a job that we undertook at one point with a collective understanding that this was something that needed to be done, and we're not done with this job. I could see you could bring people back around to that.
Right. And so, I'm just saying, these public health issues are universal. And should be kept universal and ought to be, I think to me that's more important to me than whether or not we keep the filibuster. I get the discussion. That's after you win.
Oh yeah, well,
running on it as an issue, I don't see that.
I don't know. I mean, people will ask you about it. It does it comes up, and you need to prepare an answer for yourself. That's definitely true. People will ask you about the filibuster if you're a senator, and I guess even if you're not now, but. And it's not entirely unrelated. I was thinking, you did point out it's a different issue from climate, but it is environmental. But there is that little bit of overlap in one of the more interesting aspects of what has now come to be known as the one and only Green New Deal. They do it from a climate perspective, but there is, of course, that angle in it for that deals with renovation and retrofitting of pretty much every building in the country. And I guess while you're in these, they're covered in lead paint.
You might do some lead abatement too. And if you ask the question, well, how much is that going to cost? You look at lead and say, how much is it going to cost not to do it?
Yeah, we've done and honestly, at this point, I don't know how successful the complaints about, well, how can we, it's such a big ambitious project and how much is it going to cost? We unleaded our gasoline. If you can take lead out of every car in America, Americans love cars. The one place we haven't been able to take the lead out has been with the guns, and that's actually some of the worst lead poisoning threats in the country. But we'll have to let them take care of that one privately, because they think they actually do believe it's a Second Amendment violation to require that they abate the lead dust issue inside of a gun range. Okay, well, you guys, you're creating big problems for the rest of us, but hopefully that comes to rest on you and not us sooner rather than later. But that's a big deal too. But yeah, if you're going to be out there working on infrastructure, and that tends to create jobs in big ways. Then lead abatement, sure, absolutely. And there's a community of importance to pretty much every state that's got a lead issue somewhere.
Right. So, hey, maybe the next president can declare an emergency.
Get the lead out, we might say.
That story, Jamil Smith, is in Rolling Stone, awaiting the lead poisoning tipping point, for those of you who would like to read it. And let's see what else. We got the Vietnam summit coming up with Donald Trump. The thing that, of course, I was asking this morning on Twitter, which I never really got a good answer to, is that if Trump's best friend forever, Kim Jong-un, is traveling to Vietnam by train, then did Trump decide to do the same thing?
He's going to demand the infrastructure.
And if so, how long is it going to take for him to come back?
I don't know, but he should at least.
These are the questions Americans are asking.
I hope he shows the train, and I hope Trump demands to take a train back. That'd be a great idea.
I'm really tempted to finish this segment with something completely different and tell you the bat story.
The bat story.
Yeah.
Okay, this is the bat time for it, and the bat channel.
Same bat time, same bat channel. Right. Oh, come on, Abby.
She doesn't
it's
like
only
bats.
A bat. So we found a live bat in a rare bookstore, says the Museum of English Rural Life.
Oh, I saw that abbreviation.
MERL.
Merle.
Museum of English Rural Life. Merle.
Okay.
We have a big boring box with lots of fun, rare historic archives and books in it. It's so boring on the outside, we don't have an image, but it's very exciting on the inside. It's where we keep the Ladybird Books Archive, medieval manuscripts, our children's book collection, the W.H. Smith Archive.
That archive is the best.
It's a treasure trove full of lovely, lovely books. And you know what's not a book? A bat.
True. Look at that.
Bats can't even get library cards. But here it is. They show a picture of it, chilling above a fire exit. He can't get out. He got through a tiny hole to begin with, which we're plugging, but the hole was so tiny, our bat couldn't find the exit like a bewildered father in IKEA. The bat signal was lit, and the bat signal is one of our librarians screaming, "There's a bat in the library!" running down the corridor. That's the bat signal.
Wow.
And because the universe is weird, one of our volunteers, and this is the great thing about it, if you've ever done volunteer work, right, the volunteers come from all sorts of places, all walks of life, and carry their previous experiences with them that you normally don't pull on, but sometimes you have to. So one of the volunteers also looks after bats in her spare time. Seriously. She saves bats and nurses them back to health in a spare room and releases them back in the wild. Our team is full of secret X-Men.
Bats and libraries.
Right. So first things first is to check the gonads, which conferred the bat is a boy. We thought the bat was a type of pipistrelle, and after examining the ratio of forearm to fifth finger and wing venation, the wing veins tell you what kind of bat it is.
Oh.
So they found out what kind of bat, and it turns out the species has only recently started migrating to Britain. They previously traveled from the Baltic to settle in Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, or France. The original populace here. And, of course, they named the bat Merlin. But he's helping a current project capturing and ringing these bats so they can learn more about the migratory habits. And then a link says to how you can find out more about bats so you don't have to be scared of them. And thanks for listening to the bat story. But, you know, it's just
Dracula.
Ordinary, regular people have talents. You just don't know what they are. But sometimes in emergencies, and to them, to the librarian who was ringing the bat signal out very loudly, it was an emergency. You know, it's you find out what people can do. Everybody can do something you can't do, and it's just always fascinating to find out what that is.
Yeah. So they flew over the English Channel and then.
Or they took the channel. I'm not sure.
Oh, that could be. That's a very big hole.
Maybe I have a monthly pass.
So remember, everybody, if you have a bat in your library, belfry, whatever,
you know,
check
of course,
the
the difference here is in the U.S.
That's
we worry about the bats having rabies, and so it's don't go near it and call somebody.
Right. Honestly, they've never told me anybody. You know what you should do is check the bat's gonads. Oh, really? That might be the last thing I do. I may have that backwards, but I hope that doesn't put anybody at any risk. Although, quite honestly, I think the bat would appreciate it, too.
Right. No human cases of rabies acquired in the UK from animals other than bats have been reported since 1902. So that doesn't I'm just looking that up on Google, and that doesn't make me feel good about whether the bat had rabies or not.
No. That's the only way people get rabies in Britain? Is that what that comes down to? Is bats?
Yeah, there have been only 4 deaths since 2000, all in people who were bitten by dogs abroad.
Oh.
The last case where someone was infected in the UK occurred in 1922.
Okay.
However, in 2003, it was recognized that UK bats may carry a rabies-like virus. So get an expert to help you with the bat if you find one. Don't just go ahead and think, oh, well, the nice old ladies in this English volunteer library can handle it, so can I. Don't do that. Actually get some professional help.
That's a mistake that could easily be made now. So don't try it at home, but don't
try this at home, but it's a very cute story.
Okay.
Anyway, so that's my segment for today. I think we got through that all right.
Yeah, and I'm still on the no gonad checking camp when it comes to bats.
Well, people have their
that
hobbies.
Won't change. Yeah, that's
it
right.
It just happens not to be yours. That's all.
Libraries, bats, gonads. Whatever.
Books. It's all about books. Yes. It's a book story.
Illuminated.
It's a book story, but it's a story about volunteers. And so hats off to the volunteers. Nice. A lot of small communities like mine couldn't survive without them.
Right. And okay. Well, that is a hell of a story. It's very odd that it would find such popularity on Twitter, but I think probably even without the gonads, it would have been cool. Okay.
Oops. Our power just went out for a moment, but luckily I have those batteries, and so I didn't lose you.
Excellent.
And now it's back on, and just it's a real-life endorsement of the whole concept that you were talking about. With that, let me get off in case something else happens.
All right.
But this is Greg Dworkin speaking to my good friend David Waldman Kagro in the morning, and thanks for joining us this Monday morning. David's got a whole other hour of the show to do, and I'll be back on Wednesday, and we'll see by then whether there's more talk of no Mueller report. I think we can talk about that all week because I don't think there'll be one this week.
Yeah, that's right. And first thing you do with Mueller is check the gonads. That's what I learned. I could wait for this report. Okay. Thanks, Greg.
When the stuff hits the fan, check the gonads. I'm going to remember that.
It might. You'll know if that's what hit the fan first, but if anything else hits it,
whatever.
I would
All
check
right, I'll talk
next.
to you on Wednesday.
Very good. Thanks, Greg. And I can't. How do I do another hour? Knowing that, all right, well, I learned what I learned. That's an awful lot. Let's see. We're going to have to catch up on a bit of I got some controversy swirling at home as well here. Okay, checking my email. But let's move on to other gonad type checking type story. I don't think that has any. I hope that won't come up again. But another of the anticipated activities of the week, I guess we could say. I have two stories. One that is more analytical, and then one more upfront. Let's go to the New York Times. Is actually the more of the upfront of the two. New York Times, Carl Hulse, is he Hulse? I don't know how he pronounces that last name. With this piece that may also affect your week and connects to previous stories. GOP, that's the Republicans, they actually call themselves that, ready to nuke Senate Democrats again over nominee delays. Now, they've been confirming their judicial nominees at record pace, but of course, the massive delays accompanying that record pace somehow, see if you can put these two things together, have got them to the brink of threatening to use the nuclear option again, which is of no surprise to anyone. But like we said, the filibuster back in the news again, and here's the deal. Senate Republicans are preparing to detonate a mini nuke. That's all that's been detonated so far. Angry as they are over Democratic delaying tactics that have slowed the conveyor belt of Trump administration nominees plotting toward confirmation. The Senate majority is preparing to strong-arm a rules change that would reduce required debate time on judicial and executive branch appointees to 2 hours from as many as 30. That's a little bit of a misstatement of what's happening. Not, terrible or purposeful. There's no required debate time on judicial and executive branch appointees. There is required debate time post-cloture if you're forced to invoke it. But no required debate time on judicial or executive branch appointees or anything like it. But that's something that we've discussed a little bit in the past. It's not even a terrible, terrible thing to contemplate. It's actually one of the filibuster reforms that I thought would have made good sense the first time around, which we've explained in the past. Once you invoke cloture, the cloture procedure included up to 30 hours of additional debate post-cloture, with the idea in mind that what you would be invoking cloture on would be a legislative measure, and the 30 hours afforded to people post-cloture was for further debate and amendment of this pending legislative measure. However, the filibuster non-rule, since it's not written into the rules, it's a matter of negative in the rules. The cloture procedure was developed, like I said, with the idea in mind that at that time nobody filibustered nominations. It didn't make any sense. It wasn't something people conceived of doing for the most part, actually filibustering these things on the floor. But so the cloture procedure included these 30 minutes for anything on which you invoked cloture. And then once we began to realize, you can filibuster nominations too, but that's okay because you can always invoke cloture to end debate and get those nominations taken care of. That was a point at which they realized, after every cloture on a nomination, we got to have 30 more hours of debate, even though you can't amend a nomination. It doesn't make any sense, but that's the rule we wrote, and so now we have to live with it. And that was supposed to keep people away from overdoing it with the filibuster with respect to nominations, and it never worked. So now they want to get rid of that. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue with this story. Did everybody get I think we've discussed it enough times before that maybe the backgrounder doesn't have to be all that long. But so that's where we currently stand. The filibuster non-rule that is expressed only in the negative through the cloture procedure had built into it the 30 post-cloture hours for debate, thinking that the only thing you would ever be invoking cloture on would be an amendable legislative measure. That's not actually the case. Once we began seeing nominations filibustered, at least with regularity, we began to see this weird situation where you were sitting 30 hours on your hands, debate. I mean, sometimes they used it, sometimes they didn't. Sometimes they waive it and give it back, but it became a delaying tactic all in its own right, and people became used to the idea that, look, a controversial nomination is going to take, at minimum, this number of hours to get through. And if you have dozens or even hundreds of them to make, this is going to happen hundreds or dozens or hundreds of times over and over again. And back in 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, while we were anticipating at some point the Senate majority, then in the hands of the Democrats, coming around to the realization that at least something had to change with regard to the filibuster. If not getting rid of the whole thing, then as they eventually settled on it, at least getting rid of it for executive and judicial nominations. Once they settled on that, I thought, well, at least you could do is get rid of post-cloture debate time on nominations. That actually makes sense because there's nothing you can do with that time. The game is over, and perhaps there should be some time allotted for people to make final remarks, particularly, anticipating some controversial nominations out there. But yeah, it should probably be reduced. But it didn't get reduced, and now the Republicans want to be the ones to reduce it. So this would be their second bite at the mini nuclear apple, I guess. All the nominations having had the filibuster eliminated for them, save the Supreme Court by Democrats in 2013. Then the Supreme Court one wiped out in order to push through Gorsuch and later Kavanaugh by the Republicans. And now they're annoyed about the post-debate time. So this would be the third time in 6 years that one party has used the procedural tactic called the nuclear option, sort of, to rewrite the Senate rule book rather than do it the old-fashioned way by assembling a bipartisan consensus. Oh my. The change might not be as drastic as the 2013 Democratic decision to abolish the 60-vote filibuster on most nominees. I don't see why not. Or the 2017 decision by Republicans to extend the 51-vote confirmation threshold to the Supreme Court. There, I think this one is more drastic than that one. But whatever, he needs to both sides it, so he does. But Democrats say the consequences will still be significant, accelerating the nominating process for 80% of administration appointees, limiting the vetting of nominees, and keeping the confirmation conveyor belt humming. Which, by the way, again, let me just say that again. Keeping the confirmation conveyor belt humming. If the confirmation conveyor belt is humming, there is no real serious worry out there over nominations delays. But okay, whatever. Democrats say the consequences will be significant, accelerating the process. Republicans something, conveyor belt humming. I don't know why they agree to that language. Maybe they'll call up and complain about it. Who knows? Well, anyway, moving on here. They want to ram more nominees through. That's definitely true. And that, the comment of Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota, in case you hadn't heard of her in the last couple of days, gee whiz. The senior Democrat on the Rules Committee said about the proposal to cut debate time. President Trump has made his preference clear. He's a why don't you just-ist at heart. Democrats in the Senate are still slow-walking hundreds of highly qualified people wanting to come into government. They're not qualified, etc. He complained last weekend on Twitter, never been such an abuse in our country's history, except for all the times you guys did it. Mitch should not let Senate go home until all are approved. The Senate had already left for 10 days. So super effective grousing there by Trump. Of course, Democrats would contest the president's historical analysis, given the year-long Republican blockade of Merrick Garland, President Barack Obama's Supreme Court nominee, but Republicans say Democrats are stalling non-controversial nominees to simultaneously hamstring the Trump administration, as I could have said there, the Hump administration. I don't know where that was coming from. Gee whiz. And force Republicans to waste sparse Senate floor time, and they are fed up. Not that the Senate was doing anything with its time anyway. Presidents deserve to have their teams in place. It is that simple, said Senator Roy Blunt hypocritically. Republican of Missouri, chairman of the Rules Committee, told the panel last week. It applies to whatever party occupies the White House except the last one when we did it. I don't know how you just do that with a straight face, but there you have it. He and Senator Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, the majority leader, sought to persuade Ms. Klobuchar to go along by arguing that as a recently announced Democratic presidential candidate, her administration would benefit from the expedited process should she win. That's going to really help me with my base, Ms. Klobuchar retorted sarcastically about the Republican encouragement. And it might. With hundreds of Trump appointees awaiting action, some for more than a year, and of course hundreds of vacancies for which Trump has never even bothered to come up with one nominee. Republicans say they can no longer tolerate Democrats forcing them to stretch out floor consideration as long as possible, eating up multiple days to confirm a single person. Republicans have had to vote to cut off debate on nominees, essentially end a filibuster, more than 120 times in Mr. Trump's first 2 years, only to see many of the nominees then easily approved. Under the proposal by Mr. Blunt and Senator James Lankford, Republican of Oklahoma, the current requirement for another 30 hours of debate on a nominee after the first vote would be cut to 2 hours on sub-cabinet level posts and federal district court judges, allowing them to proceed much faster. I just don't think it is fair in any way to continue the practice we have seen on full display here, Mr. McConnell said. I know, you guys did it too, and it's really ridiculous. It's very frustrating to have to read these statements. It is time for the Senate to change the practice before it becomes so pervasive that the genie never gets back in the bottle. Duh, too late. Democrats have multiple problems with the proposal, and one of them is named Garland. Democrats remain outraged by what they see as a stolen Supreme Court seat and say it was Mr. McConnell himself who pioneered the tactics they have adopted. It has created some hard feelings because it was consciously done in the hopes that your party would win the next presidential election, and you did. Senator Richard Durbin, Democrat of Illinois, told Mr. McConnell, when we talk about records of obstruction, I think that record has been broken at the highest level. At the same time, Democrats say the delays cannot be all that serious since Mr. McConnell and the president have regularly trumpeted the record number of judges they've installed in the first years of the administration. Ms. Klobuchar noted that Mr. Trump had 53 district court judges confirmed compared with 15 for Mr. Obama in that period, and that Mr. Trump also won the confirmation of 30 appellate court judges by the midpoint of his tenure, the most ever. And by the way, I think it should probably be pointed out that there were more vacancies available to Trump. It wasn't just the Gorsuch Supreme Court seat that got stolen from Democrats. A large percentage of the district court and circuit court nominations that Trump has been able to fill were created by and preserved by the very same tactic. There was a huge backlog throughout the Obama administration, and they stalled for years on end on dozens of judicial appointments in the hopes that over not just 1 year, but 2, 3, 4, 8, there would be a Republican president in place and a Republican Senate who could fill those judicial appointments, and that's why you see those records. All right. Continuing on, then, the facts tell us that it is unnecessary to change the rules of the Senate right now, said Ms. Klobuchar, who noted that 2 judicial nominees had to withdraw last year after new objections surfaced as the 30-hour clock was running. And that's true. That is an important time, although, quite honestly, you're going to have to do your staff work faster and earlier. That's kind of one of those things. And if you find something that gets somebody to the withdrawal point, well, then, it's a pain in the butt, and it's hard to get the numbers involved for impeaching them. Put those numbers together, 2/3, of course, in the Senate, and it's a virtual impossibility, but at least the opportunity exists. Mr. McConnell acknowledged that he has placed a priority on judges. Another 40 are in the pipeline right now, 34 of whom would be covered under the new rules. But the focus on judges and their lifetime appointments has meant that the lower-level executive branch nominees, what Mr. McConnell calls assistant secretaries of this, that, and the other, have stalled, leaving the executive branch resembling Swiss cheese shot through with vacancies. We end up with an executive filled with acting nominees who have no accountability to us, said Senator Lamar Alexander, the Tennessee Republican who has worked on resolving nomination struggles in a bipartisan way in the past. That's a lie. You haven't. He thinks he has, but he really hasn't. This has to change. The two parties worked out a temporary agreement on limiting debate in 2013, but that predated the severe escalation in nomination partisanship. The Republicans say they remain open to Democratic ideas on how to tweak the proposal to attract bipartisan support. Depending on how Republicans move ahead, the change could be enacted with either 60 or 67 votes, both of which would require significant Democratic involvement. That would prevent another nuclear detonation. So as a rules change, it would require 67 votes. Why would they enact this with 60 votes? I guess that would be invoking cloture on the motion to allow them to invoke cloture. Let's see. There would be cloture on the motion to, I guess, what exactly? I don't know what they would need 60 for. I guess you could engineer something. But if they're looking to change the rule, if they want to change the written rule, they need the 67. If they want to change the interpretation of the rule, they should be able to do that with bare majority. I'm not certain what the 60, how they would need, but it's not impossible to imagine, but we'll see if they describe it. No, there's not enough left in the article for them to describe it. Anyway, Republicans are making it very clear that if Democrats do not go along, they will soon jam the change through on the Senate floor with a simple majority using an arcane parliamentary maneuver that Democrats employed in 2013 and Republicans followed in 2017. The arcane maneuver being majority rule and turning the House into the Senate into the House. Oh my God. In 2013, Senator Carl Levin, the Michigan Democrat who fought the change before retiring, said allowing a Senate majority to change the rules at will would mean there were no rules. It's beginning to look as if he was right. Except for the fact that the truth is that, let me ask you this. When you run into people who say things like this, for how long have you personally been familiar with the phrase majority rules or the concept of majority rule? And the answer would be basically since you came to understand, the concept of voting and knew the language well enough to understand what you were talking about. In other words, it's a pretty ancient rule. And as a matter of fact, it's incorporated throughout the Constitution's design for both houses. There is no constitutional provision for a filibuster. There never really has been anything formal in the Senate, except for perhaps the last, the last couple decades. Certainly, they've formalized, like I say, the reverse of the filibuster, the cloture rules. But there's nothing there's certainly nothing that extends from the Constitution about the thing. The only thing that there is in the Constitution with respect to the rules is that each house shall determine for itself what its rules will be and how they'll come to their decision about what those rules will be. And if they had intended for that to require a supermajority, the founders were familiar with the concept of supermajority and they wrote it into the Constitution in requirements for legislative branch voting in several places, but they consciously left it out of the question of the rules. They simply left it up to the houses to decide for themselves. So I only bring that up to say, Carl Levin and others like him really think they're being super clever, and they've convinced the writer here, Carl Hulse, I guess, has bought into the idea that, allowing the Senate majority to change the rules at will would mean there were no rules, except if, what would we say about that statement if the rule always was that a majority of each house can decide what its rules are? And it's only for the past couple of decades that we have convinced ourselves that no, the rules are really that it takes a supermajority, even though it doesn't say so in the Constitution at all. And if it says anything in saying nothing about it, the only thing you can possibly argue that it says is that it says that the majority will rule. And that's always been the case, except for the past couple of decades where we've pretended it wasn't, even though we have known for quite some time that is, in fact, the way it works. I mean, the last major overhaul of cloture rules in the mid-'70s, when the threshold for the legislative filibuster was lowered from, cloture was lowered from 67 votes. You needed 2/3 of the Senate to invoke cloture on anything, and it was lowered to 60. And, way back when we described exactly how that process went, the Senate, within living memory, within the service of still, maybe two senators, perhaps, or two or three members of the Senate are still around prominently in public life who cast votes at the time. Pat Leahy among them, and he's still in the Senate. But when they changed that threshold, they did it by the very same process. And they did it by that process because they realized, again, at the time, that there was nothing standing in their way. Carl Levin has it backwards. And anybody who believes Carl has it backwards, it's not a matter of there being no rules. It's that the rules have been the same since the beginning, and we've just pretended they weren't. There's nothing inventive at all about saying that a majority will rule in this situation. The anomaly is pretending that you needed 2/3 or 3/5. That's the novelty. You made that up in the middle of the last century. For all the years in between, it was simply assumed that a majority could do it. It's just that they never felt like they had to. Only now do they feel that they have that pressure. All right. So anyway, I always find that insulting and wrong and worthy of reprimand whenever we get the chance. All right. I did have another piece on the subject. This one from Slate. Let's see if there's anything else to mine out of this. Republicans are abolishing judicial appointment norms again. Jeremy Stahl writes in Slate. A former Obama staffer, though, explains how he thinks Democrats could effectively respond. And this is somewhat interesting. This does expand on the subject a little bit. Next week, that means this week, is set to see the biggest fight over the federal judiciary since Brett Kavanaugh, did you even know this was happening, was confirmed to the Supreme Court in October. As the New York Times reported on Wednesday last week, the Senate is due to consider a Republican plan to cut the amount of debate time on district court judges from a maximum of 30 hours to just 2 hours. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is reportedly considering nuking the filibuster to push through this change, which would further speed up an already conveyor belt-like confirmation system that has allowed President Donald Trump to seat a record number of judges. A better perspective, at least in laying out the problem initially. Meanwhile, the Senate is also due to vote on the nomination of 4 circuit court nominees who are particularly controversial because they have not received approval from their home state senators, in this case, all Democrats. This approval, this is a very different norm, but goes along with the filibuster in this sense. The approval, traditionally referred to as a blue slip, we've talked about them, is a system by which judicial nominations would historically not go forward without the approval of senators from the judges' home states. The term blue slip comes from, well, the pieces of paper that home state senators typically need to return to the Judiciary Committee in order for a nomination to go forward. They must have been blue, you see. Republicans already effectively killed the blue slip process, he says here, last year for circuit court nominations by allowing the confirmation of David Strauss after one home state Democratic senator did not return a blue slip. But this latest escalation will be unprecedented. I don't know whether that's really true. And Republicans had already effectively killed the blue slip process before in the early 2000s when Orrin Hatch basically did exactly what Grassley did this time around, and everybody forgot it. And everybody forgot it because Pat Leahy said, well, we're not going to be like the Republicans. When we take over the majority in the Senate, we're going to bring back the blue slip rule. And they did. And everyone thought, that is so noble. And then when Republicans took over again, they said, we're getting rid of it. And everybody said, damn, why did we shoot ourselves in the foot for all those years, Pat? And Pat said, something. So anyway, it worked with respect to Jeremy Stahl. Jeremy thinks this is the first time that they've ever done this. So it was a brilliant plan. Orrin Hatch did it, got away with it for years. Pat Leahy undid it, and then when Republicans needed to do it again, they were able to fool the people covering the situation into believing this is unprecedented. This is the first time this has ever happened. So Orrin Hatch gets away scot-free, except among us. But what do we care? Or what do we count for, right? I mean, something. It's not like we have hedge funds or anything. Okay, so where were we with this one? Right. If Washington's Eric Miller is confirmed to the Ninth Circuit, for example, it will be the first time in 100 years, I guess, that a judicial nominee will have been confirmed without the blue slip of either home state senator. And there's an asterisk on that. And I don't know where the footnote that goes along with it is. When it's online, if it's down at the bottom, there's no finding it. You got to scroll and scroll and scroll. Okay, let's see. So, ahead of this drastic set of escalations, I spoke with Chris Kang, who ran judicial nominations for the Obama White House for more than 4 years. Kang argues that given these recent escalations, Democratic senators should band together, it's always a good idea, and attempt to force Republicans to back down from this latest escalation, the blue slip one. He explained how they might do this in the following conversation, which has been edited and condensed for clarity, which is great because I love clarity. Jeremy Stahl, our writer here, asking, what's his name? Chris Kang, this question. Could you please walk me through how blue slips worked when you were working on judicial nominations as part of the Obama administration? Well, when I was in the Obama White House, Chris says, I worked for 2.5 years in the Office of Legislative Affairs, and in that capacity, I worked with Senate offices and with senators trying to find consensus on judicial nominees. After that, I worked with the White House Counsel's Office for 4 years, where I ran the entire judicial nomination process from the selection and vetting to the confirmation of nominees. Not responsive, but okay. The one through line for the entire Obama administration, whether it was Democratic Senator Pat Leahy as chairman or Republican Senator Chuck Grassley as chairman, was that unless a nominee had support from both home state senators, that nominee would not move through the Judiciary Committee. And I don't think that's actually true. I think Grassley, at least he threatened several times to move people even if he didn't get those blue slips. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he just threatened it and then backed off of it. But Orrin Hatch did it. So the question of whether or not there was precedent for it is, the answer still stands. Well, the next question, was this the case for circuit court nominees as well as district court nominees? It was across the board is the answer. When you look at roll call votes for President Obama's circuit court nominees who had support from Republican home state senators, almost all of them were confirmed unanimously because we did so much work to get the buy-in and support on the front end. How have you viewed the evolution of the blue slip process over the course of the last year plus in terms of diminishing that power for Democrats who are now in the minority? We can talk about it as Democrats losing power, but really it's the institution of senators losing any buy-in or influence. Senator Grassley wrote an op-ed in the Des Moines Register in 2015 saying he appreciated Senator Leahy adhering to the blue slip and he would promise to uphold it as well. And he did. For 2 years, he used that promise to block President Obama's nominees. To see him so quickly change on a dime for this short-term gain of moving these circuit court seats has been astonishing. What's your proposal for Democrats in the Senate using what limited tactics they have left to fight this? And his answer, the conventional wisdom on both sides. Is it because Democrats are now in the minority and judges can now be confirmed with a simple majority vote, Democrats don't have any leverage? As long as both sides buy into that theory, the White House has no incentive to actually work with Democratic senators, and Republican senators have no incentive to back down. What I think the Democratic senators really need to realize is that they actually have a lot of power and influence left still. The irony is that the power they have left is in the blue slips. That does sound ironic. They still have blue slips to prevent district court nominees from moving forward. This is something that Senator Graham has repeated now many times in his scant few weeks here as Judiciary Chairman, that he will continue to observe the blue slip process for district court vacancies. Thanks, I guess. What individual senators can do is commit to withhold them for vacancies in their states. For example, there are 15 district court vacancies in California. If Senators Kamala Harris and Dianne Feinstein said they would not allow any of those seats to be filled unless and until the Trump administration withdrew the circuit court nominees where blue slips had not been returned and worked in good faith on those circuit nominations, that's a lot of leverage. Do you think? I am not certain about it. I mean, If it works, yes. Same in New York. There are 2 circuit court vacancies where President Trump has moved forward with nominations that Senators Chuck Schumer and Kirsten Gillibrand both oppose. If they use blue slips to block the 13 open district court vacancies, you would force the White House to come back to the table on the circuit court judges. Unless, of course, Senator Graham is lying and simply says, to hell with that. We'll address that after this break. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption, though it's still aimed at saying thank you to all of you who are supporters of the show. We've made a lot of progress. When we first started this campaign, fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners were donating to help keep us on the air, and now that's down to about 1 in 15, but we've got a long way to go. Remember, it won't take much. Our average monthly donation is currently about $7, for which you're getting 2 hours of great news and entertainment 5 days a week. What's that, 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal. But as a wage, well, I think Democrats would be against that. But if we all put our 70 cents together, or even half of us, that'd really be something. And my kids could go to college. Now that's not all on you, but remember, patreon.com, Patreon.com, is there to make it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X, or David Waldman, or Kagro in the Morning, or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right there where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your continuing support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show, and let us continue then with this Slate piece. We had just rolled out the Chris Kang plan for trying to leverage back power on blue slips. I guess Lindsey Graham, now I guess at the helm of the Judiciary Committee in the Senate, has announced or claimed that it will be his policy to honor the old blue slip rule for district court vacancies, of which there are many more than there are circuit court nominations, the next level up. So I guess he's continuing he'll continue the Republican policy of saying to hell with it with regard to blue slips on circuit court nominees. But for district court nominees, he wants to keep that. And it's Kang's idea that if Democrats as a group agree to, I guess, basically to filibuster judges that and agree in addition to filibustering them. I mean, I guess they want to back it up with a filibuster, but I guess it will be worth less depending on what they do with the post-cloture debate time rule in a related but separate proceeding. But I guess Kang's idea is we're going to withhold all of our blue slips. That's the real crux of his theory. It doesn't really have much to do with the filibuster per se. We're going to withhold all of our blue slips on all district court judges, which you said you would honor, unless you honor the blue slip, agree to also honor blue slip rule, the old style rule, on circuit court nominations as well. And I'm not certain how well that works, but let's see if he makes a better case for it. So he was saying in the case of New York, where there are 2 circuit court vacancies where Trump has moved forward with nominations that the 2 senators oppose, if they use blue slips to block the 13 open district court vacancies, you would force the White House to come back to the table on the circuit court judges. If every Democratic senator says, we're going to withhold the 76 blue slips we have, that would stop President Trump from being able to fill almost half the judicial vacancies that exist now. That changes the incentive structure. That changes the ability to have a conversation and really push to get better judges in the circuit court system and maybe restore some semblance of a blue slip process for circuit courts. Well, our writer says to that, to push back there in terms of your description of the leverage, what's to stop Lindsey Graham from just saying something like, I said I would respect the blue slip process for district court nominees, but the Democrats are not acting in good faith. They're doing an across-the-board blockade, and I can no longer have this be the process. Otherwise, we'll never get any business done, and we'll never have any judges confirmed again. So no more blue slips for you. good question. His answer, there are not that many circuit court vacancies. So the possibility that the personal power of Republican senators will be eroded is much smaller with the elimination of blue slips on circuit court appointments. The odds that there's going to be a circuit court vacancy from South Carolina where there's a Democratic president, while there's a Democratic president and Democratic Senate is not so high for Senator Graham, for example, to feel that he's sort of giving anything away. However, I'm not certain I understand that, but however, there are a lot more vacancies at the district court level throughout the country. And each Republican senator will be faced with the prospect of not having any say for these district court vacancies. And this is a power that they guard jealously. Again, these Republican senators would come to us in the White House and say, that's not the person I would nominate, this is the one. And then we in the White House, when he was there, would have to decide, is the pick good enough that we'll move ahead with that person? Giving, again, the right of first refusal to these Republican senators. If you don't have any blue slips at all for district courts, that's going to be the ability for a Democratic president to start placing not just prosecutors who we think are good for the district court openings, but filling them with public defenders and immigration rights activists and pro-choice activists and LGBTQ rights activists. The possibility of a future Democratic president putting these lawyers and advocates in place should have a very chilling effect on all Republican senators and at least make Lindsey Graham think for a long time before making such a drastic move. Yeah, maybe. Unless, of course, Pat Leahy or the next chair of the Judiciary Committee says, well, we love the blue slips so much that we're going to restore them when we're in the majority, just like we did last time. And I don't see why Republicans wouldn't bet on that. And also, by the way, can I just say that we should be putting public defenders and immigration rights activists and pro-choice activists and LGBTQ rights activists in these positions regardless of what Republicans feel about this thing. This is another sort of area in which Democrats have done a lousy job or done themselves, I think, a disservice in many ways by doing things the Republican way, that the only way we can get judges through. I mean, they've put people in here who are, there have been a few withdrawals, right? But they've been nominating people who get rated not qualified with some regularity. They are nominating people who are ghost hunters to be put on the federal bench. That guy had to withdraw his own nomination. They put horrible, very poorly qualified or outright unqualified people up for these nominations all the time. And we fret over it and say, well, the only thing we can do is put tough on crime prosecutors up, because those are the people who would be generally viewed as qualified and would also meet with Republican approval. If we put a public defender on the bench who would be absolutely every bit as qualified as a prosecutor for the judgeship, that'll make Republicans balk because they're against, poor people having a defense when they're in court. I mean, how long has this been going on? But it's the same dynamic that moves Democratic presidents to nominate Republicans as their defense secretaries, which is something that went on for so long. We finally just recently got over in the second term, I guess, or for Obama. But I mean, those of you who have paid attention to that issue will remember that very clearly, that for the longest time, Democrats thought that the only acceptable kind of person and they might even been right in terms of getting the votes. In order to get Republican votes for a nomination for Secretary of Defense, you had to nominate a Republican and probably a Republican ex-senator at that, just to get them on board with the concept that they outlined in the previous article, supposedly Roy Blunt, saying that the president needs, or deserves to get his team in place. Maybe it was McConnell who said it at that time, but this is something that Republicans say all the time. Republican senators are always saying that about Republican presidents' appointees. They never have that to say, for some reason, about Democrats and their appointments. So I don't know. I'm not certain how well this would work out, but there's the germ of an idea here. I just think it's too easily addressed by somebody as facile as Lindsey Graham, and he'll just say, all right, well, so for the duration of my time here at the head of the Judiciary Committee, no more blue slips. I won't be honoring district court blue slips anymore. Oh yeah, well I'll show you when a Democrat wins the White House and Democrats control the Senate, we're going to put all kinds of people on the bench. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. You know, you probably won't, there won't be as many people, as many vacancies for you to fill, because we'll fill them in 2 hours instead of 30 once we nuke that part of post-cloture debate in the next nuclear option filibuster reform. And, when we're not worried about you and your interest in blue slipping the nominees we make, it'll just move a lot faster. I don't think Lindsey Graham is going to be dissuaded from this, quite honestly, by the threat that Democrats will one day be able to put public defenders on the bench. And if he really wanted to troll us, he would say, good, go ahead and do it. So, all right, anyway. So, the last question. Oh, no, not the last question, but I guess the second to last question in the piece here. If he thinks twice, Graham, and then thinks, to hell with it, I'm going to eliminate district court blue slips anyway, that is going to allow, in the interim term, President Trump to really run completely roughshod. That's what it says, but it should just be complete roughshod in terms of who he places on the bench. If Graham doesn't back down and he blows up the entire thing, why is that not a disaster for Democrats? Good question. The answer? I think that even in that situation, there's long-term benefits for progressives. Maybe. My experience in the Obama White House is, again, Republicans would be very stingy with their blue slips. For the most part, they would use their blue slips for as much leverage as they could get, as they could, to get the most moderate person they could get. That is the most right-leaning, is what he really means. You look at what Democrats are doing with their blue slips, and they are much more free to give them, or I guess in giving them. And he's probably right about that. They are much more in this mindset that is the person qualified, literally from a resume perspective, and much less willing to fight for people who have progressive values and have the same understanding of the Constitution. So in the current system even, blue slips are working against Democrats. If they were gone altogether, it would give a Democratic president a much freer hand to put forward the people that they want. The delta or difference in terms of the ideology of judges that they are able to appoint for a Democratic president overall would be much greater than the difference would be for a Republican president who is unconstrained right now. And then the last question, I guess, is one concern that I've heard is that if you cause a big fight and you blow up that committee even further over blue slips, you have less leverage for a potentially bigger and more important fight down the road. Not certain which fight he's talking about here, but okay, the answer. This idea that there's going to be something bigger down the line that's going to be more important than the courts is fundamentally misunderstanding the role and importance of our courts. And I think here Armando would agree. But also, the idea that if Democrats just play nice, Republicans will be bipartisan down the line is laughable. And here I say, yeah, it is, which is why your plan won't work as the plan proposed, but it may work in the backfiring. As you say, well, okay, even if I'm wrong, then fine. Democrats will have a free hand when they win back the White House and the Democrats control the Senate. Well, I hope so. We will see about that. I think, he continues, one of the most frustrating things to me has been that Democrats don't have any response whenever Republicans change the rules. So, for example, when Republicans changed the voting threshold for Neil Gorsuch and jammed him through, what did Democrats do in response? They didn't institutionally, as a caucus, have any response. When Republicans were running a sham confirmation process for Brett Kavanaugh, Democrats decided that would be the time that they'd start letting judicial nominations move by unanimous consent. Meanwhile, Look what Republicans did when Democrats changed the rules to overcome Republican obstruction in the courts in 2013. In response, Republicans forced Democrats to file 130 cloture votes in a 13-month period. There have only been 90 in history before that. That's a response. It's great that Democrats will all get together and vote as a caucus against Eric Miller in defense of Senators Patty Murray and Maria Cantwell having their blue slip objections overruled, but that's not going to actually change the fundamental dynamics at the end of the day. I will say that Senator Mazie Hirono has been the leader on this. Interesting. Once Republicans first ignored a Democratic senator's blue slip and moved forward with the nomination of David Strauss, she started voting no on every single Trump judge on cloture. We've seen just last week Senators Kamala Harris and Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, because of their blue slip prerogative has been overruled, they've come out and said that they're going to vote no on every single circuit judge. That's an important shift in the mentality to begin looking beyond the individual nominees that they object to. But at the end of the day, it's not going to actually change the incentive structure. Democrats withholding their blue slips on district court nominees would. And that's the end of that piece. I think that they would change the incentive structure for about 15 minutes until they leaned on Lindsey Graham, and Lindsey Graham would happily flip and say, that's the end of that. But then at least we make them do some of the dirty work that we need done prior to the hoped-for Democratic presidency and Democratic majority in the Senate. And it may be important to do that work now. Not that I believe Pat Leahy would be back in charge of the Judiciary Committee were things to flip, but somebody like him or somebody who, is influenced by him could take the chair and just do that dumb thing over again. And I suppose that would remove all the incentive for doing that. But you never know, because I don't know. I mean, that was like inexplicable, quite honestly, when Pat Leahy did that. Okay, let us move on. There are a few other subjects that we need to touch on here. Where do we go from there? Let's see. And what can we cover in the few minutes we have left? One item I will bring up that I don't know how it'll settle out this week, but another weekend development that I watched was this one here, highlighted by Nicole Bell on Crooks and Liars. Chinese officials, among others, laugh at Trump's inability to understand trade discussions. Did you happen to catch this? Once again, Trump not realizing what he was likely to get himself into, invited the press to observe something they probably ought not to have observed until everything was worked out. But Trump loves to wing things, and he loves to insert himself in policy discussions about which he knows nothing. Here's the deal. If you didn't see the clip, they're discussing this clip here. It's embedded in the piece. You can look it up if you like, and review what's going on here. But Robert Lighthizer has a long and distinguished career as a rock-ribbed Republican in Washington, D.C. It's pretty clear that he prides himself on being good at his job as the U.S. Trade Representative. And remember, for a long time, I don't think it was did Trump himself have no idea that there even was an office of the U.S. Trade Representative? He thought he was innovating like he is with the July 4th thing. We didn't even mention that. Over the weekend, he did this again. I think this is the second time he's brought this up, that he's got this great idea that in Washington, D.C. on July 4th, hold the date. On July 4th, we're going to have fireworks and a parade and all kinds of great things in Washington, D.C. to celebrate the independence of the United States of America. I'm going to call it a salute to America, which, of course, we already have. But anyway, I think relatedly, as I recall, he at some point said, what we really need is to have somebody in the administration who does nothing but negotiates trade agreements, because they're so important. Negotiates trade agreements with other countries, and I'm going to create that position because I alone am smart enough to figure out, all right, well, we already have something called the U.S. Trade Representative. Anyway, Robert Lighthizer is the guy. The Republican, Trump put him there. And they sat down in front of the Resolute desk yesterday with the president behind it, with a representative of the Chinese government, and Lighthizer was there to say, all right, we've come to an agreement with the Chinese that we've memorialized in our Memorandum of Understanding that sets forth the agreement between us to start settling our differences. But Trump, this is really kind of fascinating, interjects at some point and basically says, listen, what he says, I don't like MOUs, Memorandums of Understanding. Should I set it up with the rest of this? Why not? In a White House meeting, with Chinese officials, before sitting down to serious trade negotiations, Trump, unburdened by any intelligence or sense of strategic communication, started riffing for the cameras, questioning the effectiveness of memorandums of understanding, or MOUs, which are standard in multinational trade negotiations. He's attacking them in general. And again, what he's done here is he's brought the two negotiators to his desk to make it look like they're reporting to him. And then he brought in all the reporters so they would see how effectively he's managing the situation. But he only succeeds in pissing off both of them. Lighthizer, the more vocal of the two, because the Chinese guy isn't going to say anything. But so Trump leans in and says, once Lighthizer says, well, we've got this memorandum of understanding between us, and that's going to settle the issue. I don't like MOUs because they don't mean anything. To me, they don't mean anything. I think you're better off just going into a document. I was never a fan of an MOU. The reality show grifter babbled. What's going on here is, of course, in Trump's mind, the word memorandum means it's not binding. It's not a thing. It's just a memo. You just write whatever you want and you put it in your file. It's a memo. But a memorandum of understanding is a lot more formal than that. And I guess apparently it is a tool that's relatively frequently used in international trade negotiations. But any kind of negotiation, any sort of memorandum that's signed by both parties has got some additional heft and can, in most cases, probably be enforced like contract or quasi-contract at the very least. Both parties say this is how we understand the process we're agreeing to will work from here on in. And there really isn't often any need for any more formal document. But in Trump's mind, a couple of things are happening. One, he thinks the only things that are binding are some other, something that's called a contract. And that a memorandum of understanding, and sometimes they are used this way in the business world, are for the general outlines of things, but they're still binding. But they're, for the most part, for generally outlining what will be memorialized in a formal contract later. And that's how he used them, but that's not how the international trade community uses them. And he doesn't know that, and he doesn't want to hear that either. So there's that going on. And in addition, I saw lots of people speculating, and I think there may be something here, that Trump is kind of confusing the memorandum of understanding with a term that is also used in business or whatever it is he thinks he used to do back in the day when he was a real estate developer. He conflates it with a letter of intent. Now, they'll be different, right? A letter of intent, I think, in the way he usually used them, was, I don't know if they were signed by both parties or not. But if they were, then I guess they'd both be of some use, at least in trying to constructively assume a contract between the two parties. But a letter of intent, as he used them, tended to be, and this is where it becomes mostly important, he would sign something and say, okay, well, it's my intention, given that you are making some certain kind of offer to us, I'll be moving forward with plans to do X, Y, Z. And it might lead later to a memorandum of understanding and then to a contract in his world. But there's no letter of intent being offered here with respect to the international trade agreement. It's just a different context. But in Trump's mind, he's thinking of the MOU as something like I will call the letter of intent LOI. And he's got a separate problem going on here, which is after having told everybody during his campaign and into his transition and into his presidency, I have nothing to do with Russia. I have no business deals in Russia. I have no pending deals in Russia. I'm not trying to make deals in Russia. And telling everybody, yeah, we once thought about building a Moscow Trump Tower, but that was over a long time ago. And then revising his stories. No, I did pursue it a little bit during the campaign, but that was because I'm an international businessman. I'm not going to give up lots and lots of money because I might have lost. And then I would have been way behind on this tower. And so why should I give that up? And now, of course, we're going to hear probably later in the week from Michael Cohen, who says this was going all the way through his nomination, through the Republican convention, and into the heart of campaign season and maybe even beyond. Who knows what we'll find out from Cohen later this week or even after that. And Trump's been busy trying to deny that he was doing this in important periods of the campaign and even afterwards. And the evidence against his position is that there are floating out there letters of intent signed at very late dates, later than he originally said he had abandoned the idea, signed by him saying, yeah, it's my intention to go ahead with this Moscow project. And in his mind, where letters of intent and memoranda of understanding are similar or even identical kinds of documents, he now needs letters of intent and memoranda of understanding to be non-binding, or else he's in serious trouble on his claim that he wasn't interested in business in Russia during this critical period. He was, but if it's not binding or can be construed as non-binding, he feels like that lets him off the hook. But in order for that to be true, then memorandums of understanding have to be non-binding even in this context, even though really the two contexts being entirely different and the two bodies of law being very different. He doesn't need that, but you know how he is. He's leading a base that thinks it makes sense to say Nazis were leftists because National Socialists, you see. So memorandum of understanding in international trade law versus a memorandum of understanding among family businesses, sole proprietorships in real estate, not really actually compatible or comparable, but in his mind, apparently they are, and so therefore memoranda of understanding are non-binding, and so therefore this document that I've brought you to here to present to me is non-binding and stupid and a waste of time, and oh my God, why did I just say that in front of all the cameras? Lighthizer, for his part, goes on to say, fine, and he plays the game that Trump played with the wall. Call it whatever you want. The point is it's binding. And he gets more and more agitated. An MOU is a binding agreement between two people, he says. It's detailed. It covers everything in great detail. It's a legal term. It's a contract. By the way, I disagree, Trump shot back. We're doing a memorandum of understanding that will be put into a final contract, I assume. But to me, the final contract is really the thing, Bob, and I think you mean that too, is really the thing that means something. The memorandum of understanding is exactly that. It's a memorandum of what our understanding is. The real question, Bob, is how long will it take to put it into a final binding contract? And at this point, the Chinese official, who has, I guess, got better English skills than Donald Trump, laughs out loud. So there you have it. It was a rather extraordinary display, and we'll probably be hearing more about that. Don't know whether we'll hear about the one other thing I was hoping to squeeze in, and maybe I can do it before our music starts. Just wanted to put this on record because it's a big week coming up. One other thing to watch in case you don't have enough on your plate. Juliet Alperin and Lisa Rain have this piece in the Washington Post. I got to get ready to do our outro here. But a grand jury will be examining whether former Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke lied to federal investigators. It's a good bet that he did, since everybody else in the administration lied to federal investigators. But prosecutors have begun presenting evidence to a grand jury in Washington in their probe of whether former Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke lied to federal investigators, according to two individuals briefed on the matter. Closed-doors deliberations are focused on Zinke's decision not to grant a petition by two Indian tribes to operate a commercial casino in Connecticut, of all places, according to these individuals who spoke on the condition of anonymity, of course. and it's the Mashtanaket, Pequot, and Mohegan tribes pushing for a facility in East Windsor, Connecticut. Maybe you can tell us about that, Greg. But had no idea that was even on the radar. So once again, Ryan Zinke lands himself in trouble about something brand new, and he's not even here anymore. And of course, Indian casino gambling. Gee whiz, why would Donald Trump have any interest in pushing people about that? Although at this point, maybe he has no interest in pushing anymore because he's out of the business, as he should be. All right, West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up next with Justice Putnam. Let's see if we can't figure out a little bit about what's coming up that we may have missed. Let's see. Knowing that Southwest Airlines mechanics are worried their planes are falling apart explains the unasked upgrade I just got. Oh, is that right? Well, very interesting. You can tell that story. A little personal touch.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Lots more, of course, including the Ole Miss basketball players who took a knee to protest the pro-Confederate rally. And the NRA is under fire once again for a, quote, target practice magazine photo of Pelosi and Giffords. They are just getting themselves in trouble over and over again on that. I think they like it.